New York in 1990 was a city under siege, the worst year of crime in the city's history.
It was a terrifying time. There was no denying that crime was out of control.
But it was the 1,585th homicide of that year that the police commissioner says caused everyone to pay attention. A murder of a young tourist on a Manhattan subway platform. And police acted swiftly. Within 24 hours, they had 7 teenagers in custody. All would be convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life. But that's not even close to the end of the story.
I wanted to scream to the world, my son is not guilty. Please help me.
I literally got down on my knees, Lester, and I prayed to God. I said, I don't want to live.
It was a crime that engulfed a city. A young tourist murdered.
He was stabbed trying to protect his mother.
You had to get every one of them.
7 teens convicted. One says he's innocent.
You don't have to believe me. Look at the facts in this case.
Now, we're doing just that. Tracking down witnesses.
He was shaking. He started crying.
Revisiting evidence.
The most emotional day was reading the letter.
Is he telling the truth or lying to win his freedom?
You made that up, didn't you?
We're about to find out. This is a Perry Mason moment.
Right, she's a surprise to everyone.
I'm Lester Holt, and this is Dateline. Tonight, tipping point. In this city,
The murder of a Utah man who's become...
and in this story that transformed it,
Tourist who was killed trying to defend his family.
where does the truth live? Does it live in what was said in this police station?
All I saw him was taking a knife out.
Or what was seen on this subway platform?
Clearly, she sees one person that she recognizes.
Does it live in what was argued in this courtroom?
You made that up, didn't you? No.
Or is the truth locked up in this prison?
This is my cry for justice.
Tonight, you'll hear a judge decide where the truth will prevail. Times Square, bustling with tourists, vibrant and safe. Except it wasn't always like this. 25 years ago, New York was in turmoil. Crime was out of control. And then came the moment New Yorkers said enough is enough. A murder of a young tourist on a Manhattan subway platform, just a few blocks from where I'm standing. It's a murder that would have consequences for this city and one man for the next quarter century. It was Labor Day weekend 1990, a Sunday. The U.S. Open tennis tournament was in full swing, and thousands of tourists had come to New York to see it. Among them, Brian Watkins, a college student and tennis player from Utah, who was there along with his family.
They were avid tennis fans. That's why they were here.
Journalism professor and writer Bill Hughes has followed the story for years.
The tennis games were delayed that day, so they were out a bit later than they expected.
As the Watkins family headed out to dinner about 9:30 p.m., Hughes said they made a fateful decision.
They could have took a cab, but they got on the subway.
And that's where everything changed.
That's where everything went south.
As Brian and his family headed into the 7th Avenue subway station, a train pulled in, unloading dozens of teenagers, all headed to a nearby dance club.
It's just mayhem, there's kids all over, but they exit the subway station. A small group of 6 to 8 congregates near the top of the subway station on the sidewalk.
This particular group doesn't have the money for the cover charge.
Right. One of the guys said, "We're going to grab a wallet."
The group of teenagers went back downstairs, where Brian and his family were waiting on the platform for their train.
They spot the Watkins family standing right about here, and then bam, they come out screaming and hollering. Mr. Watkins is grabbed, knocked to the ground, and punched. He's slashed with a box cutter, and his wallet is torn out of his pocket. Mrs. Watkins is grabbed from behind, hunched over, and someone kicks her in the face. Somebody yells, "We got it, let's go."
As the group took off, Brian Watkins ran after them. One of the attackers, Gary Morales, had a knife. He realizes that Brian's right behind him.
Right. If you're Brian, I'm Morales. He goes like this.
Swings.
And then runs up the stairs.
Brian was stabbed and soon collapsed.
You send an ambulance to 7th Avenue.
Within minutes, the 911 call started coming in. Brian's mother ran to a payphone, frantically pleading for help.
stabbed him in the heart. He's dying. Is he awake? No, he's not. He's unconscious.
Brian Watkins died on the way to the hospital. He was just 22 years old.
They were the targets of young killers.
And a tourist was stabbed to death. Brian Watkins was stabbed.
How would you describe the media reaction to this murder?
Almost inducing a wave of panic.
It is the terror of life in New York City. No one is safe from random violence.
New York in 1990 was a city under siege, the worst year of crime in the city's history.
I dress for the muggers.
I wear flat shoes so I can run.
And most terrifying was underground.
Very often our subway stations.
25 years ago, the man responsible for policing the transit system was Bill Breton.
It was a terrifying time. There was no denying that crime was out of control.
Breton is widely recognized as one of the nation's top cops. He's run the police departments of America's two largest cities. Today, he's on his second tour as New York City's police commissioner. But just to put it in perspective, the murders of 1990, compare that to other years.
There is no comparison. 1990, 2,243. Last year, 333.
Brian Watkins had
But it was the 1,585th homicide of that year, Brian Watkins' murder, that the police commissioner says caused everyone to pay attention.
I'm damn angry. Of course I am.
Beginning with then Mayor David Dinkins.
Actually, the headline around that time, Dave, do something. Meaning, Dave, do something about the horrific crime rate. And the Brian Watkins stabbing was an accelerant that was added to that whole fear.
The minute you got that call, as you know, this is going to be a big one. There's going to be a lot of eyes, a lot of press on this one.
And also the idea of the nature of the attack, the wolf pack.
Wolfpack. It was the name the media had recently given to another group of 5 teenagers who just the year before were arrested for brutally attacking a jogger in Central Park. Bratton says law enforcement had a strategy in dealing with these so-called wolf packs.
You had to get every one of them. You had to send out the message that the importance of not just arresting one or two, but to get all of them.
And that's exactly what police were doing in the Watkins case. Within 24 hours, they had a group of teenagers in custody. But Bratton says the impact of Brian Watkins' murder on New York didn't end with those arrests.
Well, it was a seminal case for me that allowed us to have a tipping point impact.
The day after the murder, Bratton received a call from the governor's office offering $40 million to help fight crime. Money that would be used to hire thousands of new cops. And soon, the city's crime rate began to drop, as it has for the past 25 years. As for the suspects arrested in the Watkins case, all would be convicted of murder and sentenced to 25 years to life. But that's not even close to the end of the story. Of the 7 men convicted of this crime, one says he alone is unjustly paying the price for the murder that Commissioner Bratton says changed New York City.
I had no involvement in this crime, so it's very, very important to me that my name is cleared.
Coming up, this man admits he was one of the teens at the subway station that night. Why he now says he's not a villain in this story, but a victim.
He slapped me in my face, and he kicked me right down to the floor.
It's been a quarter century since the murder of Brian Watkins, and since then, this man, Johnny Hincapie, has been locked up, one of the 7 convicted of the crime. But he insists he's innocent.
I had no involvement in this crime, Lester. I'm the only one that's claiming innocence.
So what is Johnny Hincapie's story? To find out, I went to speak with him at New York's Fishkill Correctional Facility. Hincapie took me back to the night of the crime. He had recently turned 18 and was on his way to a can't-miss event, a party at the Roseland Ballroom in Manhattan.
Well, there was a very popular DJ who was throwing a birthday party for himself, and everybody just wanted to be there.
He explained that he and as many as 50 other teenagers took a subway all headed to the same club. And how when the train arrived, he went upstairs to the street, where he lost sight of a friend who was holding his money. He says he couldn't carry his cash because of the tight designer jeans he was wearing.
They had numerous pockets on them, but you couldn't really put your hands in them.
So he said he went back down into the station to look for his friend.
As I'm going down, I start hearing some screaming. And when I got to the bottom, I see a crowd of people running toward me.
Did you have any idea what was happening on the platform?
No.
He said that's when he turned around and ran back upstairs to the street, where he saw his friend.
He asked me what was going on, and I told him, I have no idea, but something seems to be happening over there. Let's just go to Roseland.
Hincapié says he danced until the wee hours, got a ride home, and slept in. The next day, Hincapié and the rest of New York City awoke to a huge story.
Police lineups are still being conducted inside the station house, as they have been through most of the day.
That was the first time I found out that something had happened.
He claims he didn't think much of it until later that night, 24 hours after the murder, when detectives knocked on the Hincapié's door.
And they say, well, we need to see your son because we would like to ask him a question.
Hincapié's mother, Maria, says she asked the detectives if her son needed a lawyer.
They say, how old is he? And I say, he just turned 18. So they told me he doesn't need a lawyer. The police told me he doesn't need a lawyer.
Hincapié's father, Carlos, says he was shocked. He says Johnny was a great kid, literally an altar boy. Had he ever been in trouble with the law before?
Never.
Traffic ticket?
Never.
Nothing.
Never.
That was about to change. Police brought the Hincapié's son to the precinct. What Johnny didn't know is that detectives had spent the past 24 hours working the case and already had 6 suspects in custody who had confessed.
And when was the robbery first planned?
At the train station.
17-year-old Gary Morales, nicknamed Rockstar, admitted he was the one who fatally stabbed Brian in the chest.
Could you feel it entering his body?
I just felt like a bullet push.
Police were pressing each suspect, wanting to know who else was involved. One gave Hincapié's name, and 2 others agreed.
Johnny Hincapié.
But another suspect said, no, Hincapié was not there.
They all needed money?
Nah, Johnny and Kevin left.
Okay.
Still, detectives wanted to find out for themselves.
They placed me inside of a room. There was a detective who was laying down on one of the bottom bunk beds, smoking a cigarette.
Hincapié says he told the detective exactly what he did that night, but the detective didn't believe a word of it.
He called me a liar, and he said that he had all my friends in another room. He knew what happened.
And then what happens?
He's blowing smoke into my face from the cigarette that he's smoking. He slapped me in my face. He pulled my hair, and he kicked me right down to the floor.
What is he saying to you, and what are you saying back? You tell me you didn't do this crime, so I'm assuming that you were very forceful in your denial.
I'm telling him, listen, I'm innocent. I just told you that I just saw it on the news for the very first time.
Hincapié says that's when the detective offered him a way out.
He just said, listen, if you really, really want to go home, all you got to do is just memorize a story that I want you to say. I'll have you driven home immediately.
You believed him?
Yes, I did.
Hincapié says the detective led him to believe he was a witness, not a suspect.
So in my mind, I'm thinking that if I'm a witness and I have to say that, yeah, I knew somebody had a knife and this is what I have to say to go home, then I'm going to do that.
And that's what he did. Hincapié sat in front of a video camera and told a story that he now says was scripted for him to an assistant district attorney.
So it was a plan that all of you made to get some money to go to Roseland?
Yeah.
And were you part of that plan?
Yes, I was. I said, okay, that's it. It's over with. It's done with. I'm out of here.
Hincapié didn't know, but he had just written his arrest warrant. His confession was all police needed. A confession he gave to them 3 hours after he was picked up. It's not like you were in that interrogation room for hours and hours and hours.
Well, to me, it was a long time. I was scared.
Under the law, Hincapié and the 6 others were equally responsible. even though only one actually stabbed Brian Watkins. Hincapie never went home again. And so, for the past quarter century, his mother Maria has made the same 2-hour journey every other week since her son was sent away.
It's been very hard because it's been 24 years, 24 birthdays, 24 Christmas.
When she arrives, the ritual is always the same. Same room, same tables, same long wait. Finally, he appears.
How's everything? How was your trip?
Very nice.
They say their visits are heartbreaking for both of them.
How you been able to hold on all this year? It's too many years.
Don't cry, Mama. Don't cry.
But Maria says she's been crying out, pleading for anyone to listen since that very first day her ordeal began.
I wanted to scream to the world and tell the world, my son is not guilty. Please help me.
Little did she know, help was on the way.
I love you, okay? I've been up and down throughout this whole incarceration.
Johnny Hincapie is serving his 24th year behind bars for the 1990 murder of a young tourist on a subway platform in Manhattan. His own words sealed his fate.
So you could see that it was a knife?
Yeah.
Anybody looking at it sounds like you're agreeing with it, that this is the story.
But it wasn't.
But a jury convicted him, and over the years, Hincapie couldn't get a court to hear his case again.
When all my appeals were finished, I literally got down on my knees, Lester, and I told God, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to live.
And then one day, 16 years into his prison sentence, a reporter heard about Hincapie's claim of innocence.
I covered crime. I got a lot of letters from prison inmates saying they were innocent. I never believed any of them.
It was Bill Hughes.
Met with Johnny, listened to him for a couple hours, and I didn't believe him. I saw his confession, and I thought he was guilty. But I read the transcripts. I started to look into it.
One of the first things he did was reach out to the other men convicted of this crime, who were all still in prison.
I interviewed Gary Morales, who actually stabbed Brian Watkins. I interviewed Emiliano Fernandez, who slashed Mr. Watkins, and both admitted they were involved, and both said Johnny was not.
Hughes also watched the original interrogation videos, and for the first time, he saw how that other suspect told cops that Hincapie and another team were not at the crime scene.
They all needed money?
No, Johnny and Kevin left.
Okay.
Hughes was intrigued, especially when he heard the suspect say a second time that Hincapie was not involved.
So there were 8 people surrounding
No,
these
no,
five?
6.
There were 6.
Yeah,
Okay.
because the 2 of them left.
A tape Hincapie's jury never saw.
The more I investigated it, the more I came to believe that he might be telling me the truth. There is not a shred of forensic or physical evidence.
But he confessed. He confessed not after 15 days of interrogation, but after just several hours.
Yeah, like most people, you can't possibly fathom admitting you did something that you didn't do.
Nobody does that.
Nobody would think they're capable of doing it. But the truth is, a skilled interrogator could probably get you or I to admit we kidnapped a Lindbergh baby.
In the summer of 2010, Hughes wrote an article about Hincapie's story for a magazine called City Limits.
I published an article in the 20th anniversary of the murder. And nobody really cared.
And the years continued to pass.
Lester, we've been in prison with Johnny for 20 years.
Yeah, we all our family.
Alex is Johnny's younger brother. He was 15 when Johnny was arrested.
I pray for my brother every single day. We all do.
Like his parents, he never believed his brother was guilty.
It was just a shock to all of us. Just watching my parents go, what they went through was really, it was heartbreaking. Especially my dad going into my brother's room, kissing the pillow at night. That's been in my memory for many years.
Johnny?
Lester.
So this is home?
No, I wouldn't call it home. My home is with my family on the outside.
How old are you, Johnny?
I'm 42.
You spent more than half your life behind bars.
Yes. It's terrible. Not being separated from your family. It's probably the worst thing.
Throughout his incarceration, Hincapié has been a model prisoner. He's been involved with an inmate theater program.
I don't know. I've been tired lately.
And he took college courses offered at the prison, which is where he met a man by the name of Bob Dennison.
He said, I don't know if you know anything about my case. And once he started, I said, of course I do. Everybody knows about the case.
Dennison is the former chairman of New York State's parole board.
He showed me the article that Bill Hughes had written about him.
Did he tell you he was innocent?
He did. He told me he was innocent.
And you rolled your eyes thinking,
yeah, I did. But something about Johnny stuck with me.
So Dennison decided to reach out to Hughes. And all of a sudden, Hincapié had a former parole commissioner and a reporter teaming up to reinvestigate his case.
He laughingly referred to ourselves as the White Irish Guy Gumshoe Squad. We were pounding around Queens looking for, potential witnesses.
After nearly a year of searching, they found one. A man who said he knew the truth about Johnny Hincapié.
We sat down in his kitchen. He was shaking. He was visibly nervous.
We sat at his table, and he started crying.
And he took out a napkin, and he drew a map of the subway station. He remembered as clear as if it was, a recent event.
They knew what this witness told them, if true, was a bombshell. But neither Dennison nor Hughes is a lawyer, so they got in touch with one. New York City's well-known civil rights attorney, Ron Kuby.
They said, look, we know there's no money to pay you, but he's an innocent guy. Would you take the case? So I said yes.
Kuby's first task was to talk with that witness. His name is Luis Montero.
Luis Montero offered proof that Johnny did not commit the crime.
The mystery of what happened on this subway platform so long ago took a new twist with a new witness named Luis Montero. This is a 3-level subway station. Montero had been in the subway station during the crime and told attorney Ron Kuby a story that backed up Johnny Hincapié's account of the night Brian Watkins was stabbed.
Montero establishes not only did Johnny not participate in the attack, he could not have participated in the attack.
And that's established by what Luis saw from where we're standing.
That's right.
Based on Montero's story, Kuby filed a motion for a new hearing. And 24 years after he went away, Hincapié got his wish. A Manhattan Supreme Court judge agreed to reopen the case.
Well, now, People State New York versus Johnny Hincapié.
In February of 2015, the hearing was called to order. For this proceeding, the burden was on Hincapié's attorneys, Ron Kuby and his co-counsel Leah Busby, to convince Judge Eduardo Padro that Hincapié's conviction should be vacated. Leah, who's your first witness? What is it you need to prove?
Luis Montero was the first witness, and he was there to prove that he saw Johnny at the time the crime took place, and Johnny wasn't there.
How long had you known Mr. Hincapié?
Maybe a year, give or take.
Montero testified he was also on the subway, headed to the dance club.
What was your relationship with Mr. Hincapié like?
We knew each other, but we didn't know each other that good.
In fact, they haven't seen each other or spoken since then. To understand Montero's story, it's important to understand how the subway station is laid out. The platform level is where the trains come in and where the crime took place. One long flight up from the platform is what's called the turnstile level. And then a final set of stairs gets you to the street. Montero says that Hincapié was not on the platform when the crime happened, but one flight up on that turnstile level with him.
What did you say to each other?
He asked me for this other guy that came in if I seen him.
Montero testified about specific details that matched Hincapie's version of events.
He was looking for the other guy because he supposedly has some money for him.
Another detail that matched Hincapie's story, Montero said Hincapie began going down this up escalator, which Kubi says wasn't working at the time. Seconds later, Montero says something caught his attention.
All of a sudden, I hear commotion, screaming.
Montero said that's when he saw Hincapie turn around and run back up. If true, it means Hincapie could not have been near the crime scene.
Did you see him go onto the platform?
No.
So why hadn't Montero come forward before now? Kubi says Montero was terrified because, as it turned out, he had been wrongfully accused of this very crime.
He was held in jail for 18 months, awaiting trial on this crime. He was identified by a member of the Watkins family, and then they realized that Watkins was not sure. 18 months later, they say to Luis Montero, "Gosh, wrong guy. Sorry about that." And they turned him loose.
But to Kubi, perhaps the most compelling part of Montero's testimony is how he says detectives tried to coerce a false confession from him. The very same thing Hincapie says happened to him.
He just hit me around the kidneys and just slap me. Every time I tell him something that they don't want to hear, he just hit me, you know. So that's when the nightmare started, you know.
But Montero never cracked and maintained his innocence. Kubi argued to the judge that what Montero and Hincapie say happened to them was easy to believe, that they were just two of many innocent people swept up by police at a time in New York history when crime was out of control, simply in the wrong place, in the wrong era.
We have done some terrible, terrible things to innocent people in the course of fighting crime.
Case in point, Kubi argued, the Central Park jogger case, that other so-called wolf pack. Just like Hincapie, those 5 teens had also confessed on tape, but they were exonerated in 2002 after DNA cleared them.
Defense now calls Johnny and Hincapie.
Now the time had come for Hincapie to tell his story under oath on the witness stand, something Hincapie says his original trial attorney advised him not to do.
Stand, raise your right hand.
I wanted to take the stand. He told me that the district attorney's office would basically just walk all over me because I had confessed.
Have a seat.
He testified about how he left the station and then went back down to look for his friend who was holding his money.
I gave him my wallet complete with all my money.
And for the first time in a courtroom, he accused police of coercing a false confession from him.
He slapped me in my face. He grabbed me by my hair.
Hincapie said he even had proof that he tried to recant his confession almost immediately. Jailhouse letters, including one letter dated 2 days after his arrest, telling the same story he tells today.
Please believe me. Please help me. Please talk to the judge and tell him that I am telling the truth, that the detective told me to say everything.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
I was just 18 years old when this happened. And I never had a chance. I never had an opportunity, Your Honor. From the moment that I was arrested, not one chance.
As the prosecution got ready to present its case, Hincapie's mother, Maria, leaned on her faith, as she has from the beginning.
You know, we've been separated for 24 years. I pray to God that Johnny will be exonerated and we will be finding it together.
Manhattan Assistant District Attorneys Eugene Hurley and Ben Rosenberg didn't work Hincapie's original trial, but they say Hincapie is a liar and that justice was served 25 years ago. To make their point, prosecutors cross-examined Hincapie's witnesses, starting with Luis Montero.
Good morning, Mr. Montero.
Good morning.
Assistant DA Ben Rosenberg pointed out that over the years, details in Montero's story have changed.
That's what you swore to here, correct?
Yes, it's right there.
So your testimony here today is inaccurate
and that in all these years, Montero never once mentioned seeing Hincapie at all that night, and that Montero's wrongful arrest gave him a motive to lie.
Your experience in this case, dating back 20 plus years, you're angry about it, aren't you?
I'm not angry about it. I'm just scared.
You're still scared?
Yes, you kept me innocent for 18 months. You think I'm not going to be scared of you guys? I'm petrified of you guys, you know? I can't even look at you guys, you know?
And you're angry?
No, I'm not angry. I'm scared of you.
Prosecutors had their own witnesses to discredit Hincapie's story, who did not want us to record their testimony. Remember that friend who Hincapie said was holding his money that night?
I gave him my wallet complete with all my money.
That friend's name is Anthony Nichols, and he testified that Hincapie never gave him any money to hold.
Looking for Anthony Nichols is supposedly the whole predicate for the defendant going back into the subway station or going down to the platform. But Mr. Nichols says didn't happen.
I asked Ron Kuby about that. That friend tells the prosecution that Johnny's lying. He never gave him money. How do you respond to that?
Well, that friend also told Ms. Busby, admitted on the stand, he told Ms. Busby that he just didn't remember.
Hurley argued to the court that Hincapie was lying about something else. He says the escalator that Hincapie says he ran down was working just fine, and it was moving up, not down.
He made the ridiculous claim he went down the up escalator.
But perhaps the most dramatic part of the hearing was Prosecutor Hurley's cross-examination of Johnny Hincapie himself. Hurley argued that Hincapie was making up the whole story about falsely confessing.
And it is the first time that you have ever alleged to a court that your confession was coerced by Detective Casey physically abusing you and making you memorize a story. Is that correct?
Correct.
The detective wasn't called to testify, but we tracked him down, and he denied ever abusing Hincapie. Hurley moved on to that letter.
Please believe me. Please help me.
The one Hincapie says he wrote to a lawyer 2 days after his arrest. Hurley argued it wasn't really written back then.
The date is on the letter. The date, 1990, could have been put in 2011, right?
No.
And that it was conveniently addressed to an attorney who is now dead.
In fact, you waited for him to pass away to forge that letter to him, didn't you?
Not at all, sir.
Prosecutor Hurley also ridiculed his story about being coerced into confessing by an abusive detective.
He was wearing a t-shirt, smoking cigarettes, right? Yes?
Yes.
Like some evil movie cop?
Yes.
You made that up, didn't you?
No.
Hurley argued that Hincapie knew details about the crime not because he was coerced, but because he was there.
I said, okay, let's get paid. And
You heard him say, let's get paid?
yeah.
No, they said that because you were there and it was true, right?
It was not true, Mr. Hurley.
You were there and knew it was true, right?
The prosecution's case was over. Hincapie's fate was now in the hands of the judge. And that's when Ron Kuby got a phone call.
A new witness came forward who had never spoken to anybody before.
This is your surprise witness.
Totally surprised.
This is a Perry Mason moment.
Right. She's a surprise to me. She's a surprise to everyone.
Witness testimony had just ended in Johnny Hincapie's hearing when his attorney, Ron Kuby, notified the judge of an unexpected development.
Amazingly enough, during the course of the hearing itself, a new witness came forward, a young woman named Mary Luz Santana.
Santana told Kuby she had recently read an article about Hincapie's court hearing.
And she realizes, oh my God, he's still in prison. I can't believe it.
Santana said she knew Hincapie from her neighborhood. She was on the subway that night, headed to the dance club, and saw the robbery unfold.
So she's standing here, and she sees them surrounding the Watkins family, and at that point, she starts to flee.
As she ran past the attackers, she said she saw them all and is certain Hincapie was not one of them. She said when she heard the news of Hincapier's arrest back then, she even told her mother he was innocent. But Santana says she was afraid to come forward. So Mary Lou's remained silent.
Silent. Completely silent.
All these years.
Except for telling her mother. So she doesn't get involved, but she's figured, well, you know what? Johnny wasn't there. The police will sort this out. And she sort of forgets about it.
But now, 25 years later, Santana took the stand, but didn't want us to record her testimony. Prosecutors attacked her credibility, pointing out Santana was convicted of a drug charge back in the 1990s. And they argued, just because she didn't see Johnny doesn't mean he wasn't there. Is it not possible she just missed seeing Johnny in the confusion on the platform, that he was there and she just didn't notice it?
Absolutely impossible. She saw all of the attackers. She knew what Johnny looked like, and Johnny was not among them.
It would now be up to Judge Eduardo Padro to decide a case that brought up critical questions about police conduct in a different era. I asked NYPD's current Commissioner Bill Bratton about that as everyone awaited the judge's decision. Given the climate in the city, the climate of fear, the political pressure, was there pressure on detectives to just cast a wide net in these high-profile crimes?
I don't think so. In the sense, is there pressure? Certainly. But as to the idea to going over the threshold, you can't break the law to enforce it.
So does he think the police crossed that threshold with Johnny Hincapié? If the court exonerates him, would you have different views on the Watkins case?
I don't have enough intimacy as to his particular case. I have no reason to not be supportive of the police investigation.
2 weeks ago, the day came for Judge Padro to announce his decision. Hincapié's family and friends, along with the media, filed into Manhattan Supreme Court to learn his fate. In a packed courtroom, Hincapié was clearly anxious.
On the record, the court is going to hand it out.
As the judge began to read the decision.
Under the newly discovered evidence, the court does find that the defense has borne the burden of proof. The court is going to set aside convictions.
The judge threw out Hincapié's conviction. In the decision, the judge said Hincapié failed to prove that he was actually innocent, but the judge did find Hincapié's witnesses persuasive enough to grant him a new trial. But that didn't mean he'd walk free just yet. Prosecutor Eugene Hurley asked the judge to send Hincapié back to prison while the DA's office considered its options for appeal and whether it will retry him.
During that time, we asked that the defendant be remanded.
Ron Kuby was steaming.
Let's not ignore that Mr. Hincapié has been incarcerated for 25 years. 1 month, and as of today, 3 days. He's made a quarter-century liberty down payment.
The judge ultimately agreed to release Hincapié on a token $1 bail.
The court will allow him. Please, you gotta come to order.
Hincapié and his family were overcome with emotion. He was led away to be processed for release, but that would take nearly 6 hours. Downstairs, his mother Maria waited. A quarter-century ago, she stood in nearly the same spot, in shock after her son was convicted of murder. Now, here she was again, this time with her family and a crush of reporters to witness her son's first steps into freedom. Two brothers, separated as teenagers, now reunited as middle-aged men. There were 2 other men among the crowd who Hincapié wanted to find, Bill Hughes and Bob Dennison, the self-named Irish Guys Gumshoe Squad who launched his journey to freedom.
I owe tremendous love, energy, gratefulness to these 2 individuals.
Welcome home, Johnny.
Cheers, cheers.
I'm so happy you're home.
Wow, this looks good.
His first meal, stuffed fillet of sole. His 20-year-old niece,
That's your first selfie. It's a thing now.
who was born when he was already in prison, introduced Johnny to his first selfie.
How
you doing?
Overwhelmed.
We stepped outside to talk about what his first hours of freedom were like.
I've been thinking about how beautiful it is to be free again in New York City. Watching the cars go by, the lights in the tree. It's a lot of nostalgia, you know, and I'm grateful for it.
So where does the truth live in this story?
Look at the sky up there, Johnny.
For Johnny Hincapier, it lives in this moment.
You gotta love it at the end of the day. You know, this is a dream come true.
And one thing is for sure, the city he now rejoins is much different and much safer than the one he left behind 25 years ago. In the end, the police commissioner says that has a lot to do with what happened on that subway platform.
I truly believe that the death of that young man was the propelling catalyst for the New York miracle that we've experienced for the last 25 years.